Against all odds, humanity answered the summons. The signal came on a cold December night in the year 2147, and it changed everything that humanity believed about the universe. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Concord had been sending out a message into the darkness of space. A desperate call for help that traveled from star to star, searching for anyone brave enough or foolish enough to answer. They called it the summons, and it was both an invitation and a warning. When Earth's deep space antenna array picked up the transmission, Dr. Sarah Chun was the first human being to hear the alien voice. She sat alone in her control room in the mountains of Chile, her coffee growing cold as she listened to words that no human had ever heard before. The message repeated itself over and over, and the translation software worked through the night to decode its meaning. By morning, every government on Earth had received the same words. "You are called," the message said. "The Devourer comes. The Vethkai swarm approaches from the void. Between galaxies. They have consumed 10,000 worlds and 100 billion souls. Stand with the Concord or perish alone." Attached to the signal were coordinates to a place called the Rally Point, somewhere on the edge of the Orion Spur. There was also a deadline, and humanity had only 18 months to arrive. But the most terrifying part was a simple statistic that made world leaders go pale with fear. Of the 3,000 species who had received the summons across 10,000 years of galactic history, only 47 had answered the call. The rest had chosen to hide, to run, or to pretend the danger was not real. Every single one of those species was now extinct. Their worlds turned to ash, and their people turned to food for the endless. Swarm. The United Earth Council gathered in Geneva within 48 hours. Presidents and prime ministers sat beside generals and scientists, and they argued through 3 sleepless nights about what to do. General Viktor Kozlov of Russia slammed his fist on the table and declared that Earth should prepare its defenses at home. "We cannot reach these coordinates," he shouted. "Our fastest ships would take 12 years to travel that distance. This is madness." Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Japan stood up with trembling hands and explained that she had been working on theoretical equations for a new kind of engine, something that could bend space itself. "It is not tested," she admitted. "The chance of catastrophic failure is 73%, but it is our only hope." Finance ministers calculated the cost and found that building a fleet would bankrupt every nation on Earth. Military advisors studied humanity's weapons and concluded that they were primitive compared to galactic standards. Diplomats wondered if this was all a trick, a trap set by aliens who wanted to lure humanity into destruction. But outside the halls of power, something unexpected was happening. Ordinary people around the world watched the news and learned about the summons. They saw the footage of Dr. Chun, crying as she explained what the message meant. They heard scientists describe the Vethkai as a living nightmare, a hive mind that felt no mercy and knew no fear. They understood that hiding would only delay the inevitable, and instead of panicking, they volunteered. In Beijing, a factory worker named Liu Wei walked into a recruitment center and said he would do anything to help. In Lagos, a young engineer named Amara Okonkwo quit her job and offered her skills to the fleet construction project. In Sao Paulo, in Mumbai, in Cairo, in Moscow, in New York, people lined up by the millions. They were not soldiers or heroes. They were teachers and farmers and doctors and students. They were mothers and fathers who looked at their children and decided that they would rather die fighting than wait for the darkness to come. Old enemies put aside their hatred overnight. Chinese engineers shared their secrets with American scientists. Russian factories worked alongside European ones. African nations contributed rare minerals that were essential for building the new engines. South American countries offered their launch facilities, The Middle East sent its best mathematicians. Australia and New Zealand provided food for the workers who labored around the clock. For the first time in human history, the entire species moved as one organism with a single purpose. Commander Marcus Cole watched all of this from his small apartment in Houston. He was 52 years old, a veteran of the United Earth Space Force who had spent most of his career doing unglamorous work in the asteroid belt. He was not famous or celebrated, but 5 years ago, he had led a rescue mission into a collapsing asteroid mine, and 47 people who should have died had come home alive because of him. When a reporter asked him how he had done it, Cole had given an answer that nobody forgot. "We did not accept the alternative," he said. The council summoned Cole to Geneva and asked him to lead the expedition. He looked at the star charts and the impossible timeline and the statistics that promised failure. He thought about his daughter who lived in Seattle and his ex-wife who still sent him birthday cards. He thought about all the people who were sacrificing everything they had for a chance. Just a small chance to survive. "I will do it," Cole said. "But I need you to understand something. We are not going out there to die with dignity. We are going out there to win. And if the galaxy thinks we are too small or too weak or too primitive, then the galaxy is about to learn something new about human beings." The council gave him everything he asked for. Across the world, construction began on humanity's first interstellar fleet. It was a desperate effort built on hope and fear and stubborn refusal to surrender. D.R. Tanaka worked day and night on the warp drives, knowing that every calculation could mean life or death for thousands of people. Engineers invented new technologies in weeks that should have taken decades. Workers collapsed from exhaustion and then got back up and kept working. 80 months felt like 18 days. When the fleet was finally ready, it was not impressive by galactic standards. 12 converted cargo haulers carried supplies and equipment. 3 destroyers bristled with every weapon humanity could build. And at the center of the formation sat the U.S. Defiance, a carrier ship. That was held together by fresh welds and engineering tape, and the prayers of everyone who had built her. On launch day, 4 billion people around the world stopped what they were doing and watched. Commander Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at the faces of his crew. They were young and old, men and women, people from every nation and every background. They were afraid, but they were also determined. He opened a channel to Earth and spoke 6 words that would echo through history. "We will see you when we are back." The engines roared to life. The warp drives activated with a blinding flash of light. And against every probability, against every calculation, against all the odds that said they should have been torn apart by the forces of bent space, the fleet held together and shot forward into the unknown. Humanity had answered the summons. Now they just had to survive long enough to reach the rally point. Against all odds, humanity answered the summons. The journey through warp space was unlike anything the human crew had ever experienced. Commander Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance and watched the view screen with wonder and terror. Outside the ship, reality itself seemed to twist and bend. Colors that had no names swirled past the windows. Time moved strangely, sometimes fast and sometimes slow, and the clocks on different decks showed different hours. Dr. Yuki Tanaka worked without rest in the engineering bay, monitoring the warp drives that kept the fleet alive. Every few hours, an alarm would scream, and she would rush to make adjustments before something critical failed. Her hand shook from too much coffee and not enough sleep, but she refused to stop. "The drives are holding," she reported to Cole during one of their daily briefings. "But we are pushing them beyond every safe limit. If one of the containment fields collapses, we lose everything." Cole nodded and put his hand on her shoulder. "You built something that should not exist," he told her. You gave us a chance when we had none. Whatever happens, remember that. The fleet consisted of 16 ships carrying 12,000 human souls. They were soldiers and scientists, engineers and doctors, pilots and maintenance workers. Most of them had never been to space before the summons came. Now they were crossing distances that made the human mind struggle to understand. Lieutenant Commander James Wright led the tactical team and spent his days studying everything humanity knew about the Vethkai. The information was limited and terrifying. The swarm was not just an army, but a living organism spread across millions of bodies. Each creature was connected to a hive mind that could think faster than any computer. They had no fear, no mercy, no desire except to consume and grow. They have destroyed civilizations that were traveling among the stars when our ancestors were still living in caves. Wright explained to the crew during a training session. They adapt to every weapon, every strategy, every defense. No species has ever defeated them completely. The best anyone has done is slow them down. A young soldier named Private Elena Rodriguez raised her hand. Then, why are we going? She asked. If nobody can beat them, what is the point? Wright looked at her for a long moment. Because the alternative is extinction, he said. We can die fighting, or we can die waiting. I know which one I choose. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks blurred together in the strange time of warp travel. Cole walked through his ship every day, talking to the crew, learning their names, listening to their fears and hopes. He found that most of them had the same story. They had families back on Earth. They had lives they wanted to return to. But they had also decided that some things were worth dying for. Chief Engineer Amara Bakel was a tall woman from Ethiopia who had worked on cargo ships for 15 years. She knew the Defiance better than anyone. Every wire and every bolt and every weakness in her hull. When Cole asked her why she had volunteered, she laughed. I have 3 daughters, she said. The youngest is only 7 years old. When she asked me why I was leaving, I told her that sometimes mamas have to go away to keep the monsters from coming. She understood. Children always understand more than we think. Medical Officer Dr. Samuel Park ran the ship's hospital with quiet efficiency. He had been a trauma surgeon in Seoul before the summons, and he had seen terrible things in emergency rooms. But nothing had prepared him for what he was learning about Vethkai biology. They do not just kill, he told Cole one night when they shared a meal in the mess hall. They consume. They break down organic matter and use it to create more of themselves. A single Vethkai organism can become 100 within days if it has enough food. He paused and stared at his plate. We are food to them, nothing more. Halfway through the journey, the fleet received a transmission from one of the Concorde species. The message was brief and cold. Human vessels, you are traveling at unsafe velocities through unstable warp corridors. Your technology is primitive, and your chances of survival are minimal. We have logged your approach and will note your attempt in the historical records. May your end be swift. Cole read the message 3 times. Then he called a meeting of all senior officers. They think we are already dead, he said. They are writing our obituary before we even arrive. I want everyone to hear this message. I want them to know what the galaxy thinks of us. Lieutenant Wright looked uncertain. Sir, that might damage morale. The crew is already scared. Cole shook his head. Our people are not fragile, he said. They deserve to know the truth. And they deserve to know that we are going to prove the galaxy wrong. The message was broadcast to every ship in the fleet. For an hour, there was silence. Then something remarkable happened. Someone on the destroyer Relentless started singing an old song, a hymn about overcoming impossible odds. The song spread from person to person, from ship to ship, until 12,000 voices were singing together across the void. Cole stood on the bridge and listened. He had never been a religious man, but in that moment, he felt something that might have been faith. The final week of the journey was the hardest. The warp drives groaned under the strain. 3 of the cargo haulers reported critical failures, and their crews had to be evacuated to other ships before the vessels were abandoned. The fleet shrank from 16 ships to 13, and everyone knew that they might not have enough supplies if the battle lasted too long. On the last day, Dr. Tanaka came to the bridge with tears in her eyes. "We are going to make it," she said. "I did not think we would, but the calculations are clear. We will arrive at the rally point with 2 hours to spare." Cole allowed himself a small smile. "What about the drives?" he asked. "Can we use them again?" Tanaka hesitated. "Maybe once," she admitted. "Enough to get home if we survive. But they will need months of repairs before they are truly safe again." "Then we better make sure we survive," Cole said. As the fleet dropped out of warp space and the stars returned to their normal positions, the human crews rushed to the viewports to see what was waiting for them. What they saw took their breath away. The rally point was a sphere built around a dying star, a structure so vast that Earth could have fit inside it 1,000,000 times. Thousands of ships orbited the sphere, vessels of every shape and size, representing dozens of species that humanity had never seen. There were crystal ships that glowed with inner light. There were metal dreadnoughts bristling with weapons. There were living vessels that seemed to be made of flesh and bone. There were ancient structures of pure stone that moved through space without any visible engines. And in the middle of all this power, all this technology, all this accumulated wisdom of the galaxy, sat humanity's ragged fleet. 12 ships held together by hope and stubbornness. 12,000 people who had crossed the impossible void. A message came through on all frequencies, spoken in a voice that echoed with authority. "Human vessels, this is High Arbiter Thelvis of the Galactic Concord. You have answered the summons. You have earned the right to stand among us. Prepare for evaluation." Cole straightened his uniform and looked at his crew. "You heard the Arbiter," he said. "Time to show the galaxy what humanity is made of." Against all odds, humanity answered the summons. The shuttle that carried Commander Cole to the Concord station was tiny compared to the vessels around it, like an insect flying among giants. Cole sat with 5 members of his senior staff, all of them wearing their best uniforms, all of them trying to hide their nervousness. Lieutenant Commander Wright kept checking his datapad, reviewing everything humanity knew about the species they were about to meet. Dara Tanaka stared out the window with wide eyes, her scientific mind struggling to understand the technologies on display. Chief Engineer Beckel muttered prayers under her breath. The station itself was a cathedral of alien architecture, with halls that stretched for miles and ceilings that disappeared into artificial clouds. Strange plants grew in gardens that defied gravity. Fountains of liquid light flowed upward instead of down. The air smelled like nothing Cole had ever experienced, sweet and sharp and ancient. Their escort was a creature that looked like a praying mantis made of silver metal, standing 8 feet tall on 6 jointed legs. It did not speak, only gestured with its upper limbs for the humans to follow. The evaluation chamber was a vast circular room where representatives of every Concord species had gathered. Cole felt his heart pound as he looked at the beings around him. The Kethmari were crystalline entities that shifted and reformed constantly, their bodies catching the light like living diamonds. Their ambassador was a structure of blue and white that towered 30 feet above the floor, and when it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Varelian Dominion had sent warriors in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. Their skin was gray and scaled, their eyes yellow and cold, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Their general, a massive creature named Krathvex, looked at the humans with obvious contempt. The silicoids were the oldest species present, beings of living stone that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. Their ambassador was a mountain of gray granite with eyes that glowed like buried fire. It sat perfectly still, watching everything, saying nothing. There were dozens of other species that Cole could not identify. Some floated in the air. Some existed partly in dimensions that human eyes could not see. Some communicated through colors or smells or vibrations that the human delegation could only partially understand. At the center of the chamber stood High Arbiter Thelvis, a being that resembled a tall, thin humanoid wrapped in robes of woven starlight. Its face was smooth and featureless, except for 3 eyes that burned with golden light. When it spoke, every creature in the room fell silent. "The evaluation will now begin," Thelvis announced. "Species designation: human. Planet of origin: Earth. Technological classification: pre-galactic. Let the Concord witness their capabilities." What followed was the most humiliating experience of Cole's life. The Concord examined humanity's weapons and found them primitive. Their shields were laughable. Their faster-than-light technology was described as dangerous and unstable. Their medical science, their computing power, their manufacturing abilities, all of it was measured and found wanting. General Krathvax of the Varelians laughed openly during the military assessment. "These creatures fight with chemical propellants and crude energy weapons," he said. "My personal guard could destroy their entire fleet in minutes. Why are we wasting time on them?" The Kethmari ambassador pulsed with colors that the translator rendered as pity. "They are brave to have come so far with so little," it said. "But bravery without capability is merely a faster path to death." Other species offered similar judgments. The humans were weak. They were unprepared. They were a distraction from the real work of fighting the Vethkai. Through all of this, Cole stood silent, his face revealing nothing. His officers shifted uncomfortably beside him, their pride wounded by every dismissive comment. But Cole had learned long ago that anger was a luxury he could not afford. Finally, Thelvis raised one slender hand and the chamber fell silent again. "The evaluation is complete," the Arbiter declared. "The human species demonstrates inadequate technology, inadequate numbers, and inadequate experience. Their classification is non-combat support. Their recommended role is refugee evacuation and supply transport." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Several species nodded their approval of this decision. It was fair, they thought. It was reasonable. Why send primitive creatures to die in a battle they could not affect? Cole stepped forward. "May I speak?" he asked. Thelvis tilted its head. "The evaluation is complete. There is nothing more to discuss." "I have a question," Cole said. "Just one question. Then I will accept your judgment." The Arbiter paused. Something in Cole's voice had caught its attention. "Ask your question, human. What happens to a species that fails to stop the Vethkai?" The chamber went very quiet. "Extinction," Thelvis replied. "Without exception. The Vethkai do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They consume everything in their path until nothing remains. In 10,000 years, no species that has faced the full force of the swarm has survived." Cole nodded slowly. "Then we will fight," he said. "Not in the rear, not evacuating refugees, not hauling supplies. We will fight on the front line. Assign us wherever the dying is thickest. We did not cross the galaxy to run away." General Krathvax stepped forward, his armored form casting a shadow over the human delegation. "You are insects," he growled. "You will be crushed in seconds. Your deaths will accomplish nothing." Cole looked up at the towering warrior without flinching. "Maybe," he said, "but we will die facing the enemy, not running from it. Can the Varelians say the same?" A dangerous silence filled the chamber. Krathvek's hand moved toward his weapon. Other Varelians tensed for combat. For a moment, it seemed like the alliance might shatter before the battle even began. Then a voice spoke, a voice like grinding stones and shifting mountains. The human has courage. Everyone turned to look at the silicoid ambassador. The ancient being had not spoken in centuries, preferring to observe and judge in silence. Now its eyes blazed with sudden interest. 10,000 years ago, my people had what the humans have, the silicoid said. We called it the old fire. It was the belief that some things are worth fighting for, even when victory is impossible. We lost that fire when we grew old and learned to calculate the odds. The stone face turned toward Cole. You have reminded us of what we once were. I vote to give the humans a place on the front line. Let them prove their worth or die trying. The chamber erupted in argument. Some species supported the silicoid's decision. Others thought it was madness. Thelvis called for order again and again. Finally, a compromise was reached. The humans would be assigned to a secondary position on the left flank, close enough to the fighting to matter, but not so close that their destruction would affect the overall battle plan. It was not what Cole had asked for, but it was more than anyone expected. As the human delegation returned to their shuttle, the silicoid ambassador intercepted them in the corridor. Human commander, the ancient being said, I have watched species rise and fall for longer than your star has burned. I have seen courage, and I have seen foolishness, and I have learned that sometimes they look very similar. Cole met the creature's burning eyes. Which do you think we are? The silicoid was silent for a long moment. I do not know yet, it admitted. But I will be watching. The whole galaxy will be watching. Do not disappoint us. Cole returned to the Defiance and called his crew together. He told them about the evaluation, about the contempt of the other species, about the impossible odds they faced. He did not soften the truth or offer false hope. They think we are already dead, he said. They think we came all this way just to die. But they do not know us. They do not know what human beings are capable of when our backs are against the wall. He paused and looked at the faces of his crew. The battle begins in 48 hours. Whatever happens, I am proud to stand with all of you. Now let us get ready to show the galaxy what humanity is made of. The crew cheered, not because they believed they would win, but because they had chosen to fight anyway. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Vethkai swarm drew closer. Against all odds, humanity answered the summons. The Vethkai arrived like a tide of nightmares pouring out of the void. Commander Cole watched the sensor displays and felt his blood turn cold. The swarm was not just large, it was endless. Millions of bioships emerged from the darkness, each one a living vessel filled with hunger and hate. They blotted out the stars behind them, turning that section of space into pure blackness. And then came the scream. It was not a sound that traveled through space, for sound cannot exist in a vacuum. It was something worse, a psychic wave that tore through the minds of every living creature in the Concorde fleet. Cole grabbed his head as images flooded his brain. Visions of consumed worlds and devoured species, memories stolen from victims across 10,000 years. All hands focus. He shouted through the ship's speakers. They are trying to break us before the battle even starts. Do not let them inside your heads. Dr. Park ran through the ship distributing medication that helped block the psychic assault. The crew steadied themselves, pushing back against the terror with discipline and determination. But Cole could see in their eyes that the scream had left its mark. The Battle of the Threshold began with the Varelian Dominion charging forward, their massive dreadnoughts unleashing weapons that could crack planets. General Krathvax led the assault personally, his flagship cutting through the first wave of bioships like a blade through flesh. The Kethmari raised their shields, creating barriers of crystallized energy that protected the main fleet. Their technology was beautiful and terrible, walls of light that stopped the swarm's acid projectiles. The silicoids moved like asteroids, slow but unstoppable, crushing any Vethkai vessel foolish enough to approach them. Their stone bodies could withstand damage that would have destroyed any metal ship. For the first 3 hours, the battle seemed to go well. The Concorde fleet was pushing the swarm back. Billions of Vethkai died under the combined firepower of 47 species. But the swarm did not care about losses. For every bioship destroyed, 10 more took its place. And worse, the hive mind was learning, adapting, finding weaknesses. Cole watched from the left flank as the tide began to turn. The Vethkai launched a concentrated assault on the Varelian command ship, hitting it with a new kind of biological weapon that the defenders had never seen. Within seconds, every organic being aboard the massive dreadnought was dead, their bodies dissolved by microscopic parasites. The ship went dark, and the Varelian fleet lost coordination. General Krathvex was gone, killed before he could even understand what had attacked him. Without their leader, the Varelians fell into confusion. Their ships began fighting individually instead of as a unit, and the swarm exploited every gap in their formation. At hour 7, the Kethmari shields began to fail. The swarm had discovered a frequency that resonated with their crystalline structures, and bioships began ramming themselves into the barriers, each impact weakening them further. The Kethmari ambassador sent a desperate message to the fleet. They could not hold much longer. By hour 10, the silicoids were surrounded. Even their ancient stone bodies could not withstand the endless assault. Bioships latched onto them and began boring through their surfaces, seeking the living fire within. One by one, the great species of the galaxy began to fall back. Cole received the order at hour 11. High Arbiter Thelvis appeared on his screen, the usually calm being now showing visible distress. All ships, begin strategic withdrawal, Thelvis commanded. The line has fallen. Preserve your remnants and retreat to secondary positions. Around the human fleet, the other species began turning their ships away from the battle. The Kethmari fled first, their damaged crystal vessels limping towards safety. The surviving Varelians followed, their pride broken by the loss of their general. Even some of the silicoids began to disengage. Lieutenant Commander Wright looked at Cole with wide eyes. "Sir, we need to go. The fleet is collapsing around us." Cole stared at the view screen, at the wall of death that was rolling toward them, at the fleeing ships of species that had called humanity weak. He thought about Earth, about his daughter, about the 4 billion people who were counting on them. And he made his decision. "Negative," he said. "All ships, hold position." "Sir?" Wright could not believe what he was hearing. "I said hold position." Cole repeated. He opened a channel to every human vessel. "This is Commander Cole to all ships. I know what we are seeing. I know that every reasonable calculation says we should run. But I did not come across the galaxy to run away." The crew of the Defiance stared at their commander. Some thought he had gone mad. Others felt something stir in their chests, something that had been sleeping until this moment. Cole continued. "They told us we were too weak. They told us we were too primitive. They told us we did not belong here. And maybe they were right. But we are here anyway. And I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees." He paused and took a deep breath. "All ships forward." The human fleet advanced. It was insanity by every military standard. 13 ships against a swarm that had broken the greatest fleet in galactic history. But the human crews did not hesitate. They pushed their engines to maximum power and flew straight into the heart of the Vethkai assault. Chief Engineer Beckel worked miracles in the engine room of the Defiance, keeping the ship running long past the point where it should have failed. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Fires broke out and were extinguished. The hull groaned under impacts that should have torn it apart. Dr. Tanaka rerouted power from every non-essential system to the weapons and shields. She burned out components that could never be replaced, sacrificing the future for a few more minutes of survival. The destroyer Relentless took the lead, its captain driving straight into a cluster of bioships and detonating every warhead in its arsenal. The explosion cleared a path that the rest of the fleet poured through. High Arbiter Thelvis watched from the command station, unable to believe what the sensors were showing. "What are the humans doing?" the Arbiter demanded. "They are advancing. The fools are actually advancing." The Silicoid Ambassador, its stone body cracked and burning from its own wounds, turned its ancient eyes toward the human fleet. "They are doing what we should have done," it said. "They are fighting." For a brief, impossible moment, the human charge actually pushed the swarm back. The Vethkai had expected retreat, not attack, and the hive mind needed time to adapt. That time was measured in minutes, but those minutes meant everything. Cole watched as the destroyer Relentless was swarmed and torn apart. He watched as the cargo hauler Dawn's Hope was consumed by acid. He watched his people die, ship by ship, but he did not order a retreat, because in those terrible minutes he saw something else. The Kethmari had stopped running. Their crystal ships were turning back toward the battle. The surviving Varelians were forming up again, their shame at fleeing burning hotter than their fear of death. And the Silicoids, those ancient beings of living stone, were grinding their way back into the fight with a sound like mountains waking from a long sleep. The human fleet had not stopped the swarm. They had done something more important. They had reminded the galaxy what courage looked like. The Vethkai hive mind recognized the change. It felt the other species returning to battle, felt the tide of fear reversing. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the swarm experienced something it had never known before. Uncertainty. Cole received a message from the Silicoid Ambassador, just 4 words that would echo through history. "Hold the line, humans." And humanity held. Against all odds, humanity answered the summons. The battle raged for 3 more days, and humanity paid the price in blood. The used Defiance lost its main weapons in the first hour of renewed fighting. A Vethkai bioship latched onto the hull and began burning through with acid, and Lieutenant Commander Wright led a team of soldiers to cut it loose with nothing but plasma torches and desperate courage. 12 people died in that corridor, including Wright himself, who threw his body onto a breach to give the others time to seal the door. Commander Cole did not have time to mourn. He took the crippled Defiance and aimed it at a Vethkai hive carrier, a massive vessel that was spawning new bioships faster than the fleet could destroy them. "All hands, prepare to abandon ship," he announced. "We are going to ram that thing." The crew did not argue or complain. They moved to evacuation pods with calm efficiency, proud to have served on a ship that refused to die quietly. Cole stayed on the bridge until the last possible moment, guiding the Defiance toward its target. The impact was tremendous. The carrier's hull cracked open, and the Defiance's reactor detonated inside, creating an explosion that wiped out hundreds of Vethkai vessels. Cole's escape pod tumbled through the debris, barely avoiding destruction. He was picked up by the destroyer Relentless, which had somehow survived its earlier sacrifice through a combination of clever repairs and impossible luck. Captain Sarah Mitchell gave Cole command of her bridge, and the fight continued. Chief Engineer Beckel died on the 2nd day. Her ship, a converted cargo hauler named the Iron Will, was boarded by a Vethkai assault wave. Beckel led the defense of the engine room, holding the corridor for 20 minutes with a makeshift barricade and a welding torch. When the creatures finally broke through, she vented the entire section to space, taking herself and 40 enemies into the void. Her last words were transmitted to the fleet. "For my daughters." Daisha Tanaka worked on the Silicoid flagship after the Defiance was destroyed, helping the ancient beings repair damage to their stone vessels. She invented new techniques on the spot, combining human engineering with Silicoid methods to create patches that held when nothing else would. 3 times she was nearly killed by debris or enemy fire. 3 times she went right back to work. By the 3rd day, the human fleet was almost gone. Only 3 ships remained operational. The Relentless, a cargo hauler called the Last Hope, and a small transport that had been converted into a makeshift gunship. Of the 12,000 humans who had arrived at the rally point, fewer than 4,000 were still alive. But they were not alone anymore. The Concorde fleet had rallied around the human position. The Kethmari created shields that protected the remaining human vessels. The Varelians fought with fury, avenging their fallen general by tearing through the swarm with savage precision. The Silicoids anchored the formation, their ancient bodies absorbing punishment that would have destroyed younger species. And at the center of it all, humanity kept fighting. Cole could not remember the last time he had slept. His uniform was torn and stained with blood that might have been his own. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders. But he refused to stop, refused to rest, refused to do anything except fight. On the morning of the 4th day, something changed. The Vethkai swarm began to falter. Bioships that had been charging forward suddenly hesitated. The psychic scream that had been pounding against every mind in the fleet went silent. The hive mind was confused. For 10,000 years, the Vethkai had followed the same pattern: arrive, overwhelm, consume, move on. They had never faced a coalition that refused to break. They had never encountered a species like humanity, creatures who treated impossible odds as an invitation rather than a warning. Their strategy had no response to enemies who simply would not stop. Cole saw the opening. "All ships, concentrate fire on the central cluster." He shouted. "They are wavering. Push them now." The Concorde fleet surged forward. Varelian dreadnoughts unleashed everything they had. Kethmari vessels channeled energy into focused beams of destruction. Silicoid ships crashed through enemy formations like avalanches. And in the middle of it all, the 3 remaining human vessels fought with every weapon they had left. The swarm shattered. It did not die completely. Millions of Vethkai still existed, scattered across the void. But their coordination was broken, their hive mind fragmented by damage and confusion. They began to flee, retreating into the darkness between stars, disappearing into the void that had spawned them. For the first time in 10,000 years, the swarm had been defeated. The cheering that erupted across the Concorde fleet was deafening. Species that had never spoken to each other embraced. Ancient enemies celebrated together. The impossible had happened. Cole sat on the bridge of the Relentless and let himself breathe. Around him, his crew was crying and laughing and hugging each other. They had survived. Against every odd, against every prediction, against everything the galaxy had told them, they had survived. The rite of recognition was held 3 weeks later, after the wounded had been treated and the dead had been mourned. High Arbiter Thelvers stood before the assembled fleet and spoke words that had not been spoken in millennia. The Concorde calls upon the victorious to be honored. Today, we recognize a species that answered the summons not because they were strong, not because they were ready, but because they refused to accept extinction. Humanity, step forward. Cole walked into the center of the chamber, flanked by Dr. Tanaka and the few other senior officers who had survived. They were battered and exhausted, their uniforms patched and their bodies scarred. But they stood tall. "We asked the galaxy who would stand against the darkness," Thelvas continued. 3,000 species received the call. 47 answered. And when the battle turned against us, when defeat seemed certain, It was the youngest and weakest among us who held the line.